I immediately know if someone doesn't have very good statistical background because when they look at a survey, the first thing they'll critique is the response rate. The first thing they'll critique is the sample size on a study. Sample size can be important, but generalizability is often more important than sample size. And let me explain what I mean by this. Before I do that, let's just do a quick review of what a sample is. So if all these dots represent every employee in my organization, that would be my population. Population is everyone that I want to have data on. This is everybody in my organization. But when I send out the survey, only the dots in red actually reply to the survey. So my population is this. It's everyone I'm interested in. My sample is the people that I actually have data on. So we can look at it this way. All these dots are my population, and then I'll show you some different samples. Now, people usually focus on sample size, but sample size, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is important, but more important is generalizability. So here, I've got a sample with 50 people in it. Is this a good sample from my organization? It's not, because my sample doesn't reflect the diversity that's in my population. My sample is all white dots, and my population includes white dots, brown dots, blue dots, black dots. You can make whatever ethnic assumptions you want about that. And then, okay, so let's look at my next sample. This sample is only 20 people, so it's less than half of the size of my first sample, and yet it's much more representative of what's actually going on in my population. So sample size is important, don't get me wrong, but usually what's more important than just raw sample size is my sample representative of my population? So this is really important. If you send out a survey to your organization and you get a 90% response rate, that could be great, right? But it's not enough that your sample is big. It also, you need to make sure that it's representative. And if those 10% that didn't respond, if they're all part of the same group and you're missing that group from your sample, that's a big problem. And that's something that we call non-sampling bias. So let me give you an example. This is a true story. I think it's pretty cool. During World War II, the Army hired this guy to figure out where to put armor on their planes. They were losing a lot of planes, wanted to put armor on it so that they would, lose fewer planes. So he hung around runways and combat areas for a few months, and every time a plane came in, he'd walk around and he'd put a little red dot on a picture of the plane where the bullet hole was. And so he did this for months and months and months and months until he had diagrams of all the different planes with where they had the most bullet holes. And then, so the military says, all right, so where should we put the armor? And where do you think he said to put the armor? The assumption is he would put the armor where the most bullet holes were. But he actually did the opposite. He put the armor where there were no bullet holes. Because he doesn't care if there's bullet holes in the plane. He cares if the planes get back to the runway or not, right? If they survive to get back to the runway. And so if they got a bunch of bullet holes in the wing and they're making it back, that's fine. We don't need to put armor there. The planes that he was interested in are the ones that he couldn't see, the ones he didn't have access to, the ones that got shot down and blown up and stayed out somewhere out in the battlefield where he couldn't go to, right? And so those are, if he's assuming that the ones that didn't make it back got shot in the places where there were no bullet holes on the ones that did get back, and that was the cockpit and the engines, which, makes sense anyway. So that's why non-sampling bias is so important. It's so important to be thoughtful of the people who didn't respond to your survey. And sometimes the most important people are the ones you don't sample. Right? So a lot of times organizations are having problems with turnover, and so they do a bunch of employee surveys. The problem is that they're by definition they're surveying the people who have decided to stay. Now, don't get me wrong, you can get useful information from that, especially people that are planning to leave. But the people they're most interested in are the people who made the decision to leave, and those are the people that aren't included in the employee surveys. So oftentimes you're most interested in the people who don't respond to the survey or who are systematically excluded from your sample for whatever reason.